Relationship between Wendy and Dipper is the transient glow of a first crush. The initial attraction of someone entering adolescence. But there's beauty in that, and there's pathos. The show does not demean Dipper for feeling this way toward Wendy. Something can be both transient and perfect. And that is what I'd like to explore here. Dipper enters the show with a bad tendency to think about things in a very binary, Manichaean way. Either it's good or it's bad. Either it advances his pursuit toward his goals, what he really wants to accomplish, or it prevents him from doing so. Either he's pushed toward maturity and everything it brings along with it, love, or love, quote unquote, acceptance, entering into a greater stage of knowledge and understanding of the world, and an emergence from the awkwardness and the uncertainty of the tween stage of life, or he is prevented from meeting these milestones. There are a lot of facets of Dipper, from his conception of himself as a growing, pubescent guy that the show tackles in several episodes, to his related passion for Wendy, to his general desire to discover all the secrets of Gravity Falls and to prove himself this brilliant investigator. All of these things are tied together. They're all tied together by this pursuit of maturity, this pursuit of the capacity to cross the threshold into a greater level of understanding and thus receive a greater degree of acceptance by adult society. Or at least adolescent society. But this worldview is a bit narrow. The conceit of the show necessitates that one views it as innately narrow, because the show is about looking back, in a way. It's about revering this one period of life, this one perfect summer, before the chaos and the storm of adolescence, but after the one-dimensional simplicity of childhood, when one is mature enough to want to explore, to want to know more, and yet young enough to still have that unalloyed, undiluted sense of enthusiasm and optimism. The show is not explicitly nostalgic, otherwise it would not work for its audience of a lot of kids and young adolescents. I personally watched this show when I was certainly older than the target demo, but still an adolescent myself. I was in the mid-teenage range by the time it finished. It is about looking at these milestones of tween age to early adolescent life in a funny and charming light that is appealing if you are engaging with those milestones, or if you're before them, looking forward to them. But the greater perspective of the show is fundamentally a wistful one. It is that of treasuring this one perfect ideal summer. This becomes much more evident in the last few episodes of the show as the summer starts to come to an end. And there is this dread of adolescence, of high school, of leaving this little perfect bubble of summer. Mabel is given the voice of this perspective. The perspective that is, from Dipper's perspective, quite childish, but is, from the show's perspective, from the adult perspective, actually the wiser and more mature one. Or at least the more thoughtful one, grounded in a sense that maturity is as much a loss as it is a gain. Songs of innocence, songs of experience, as Blake puts it. The songs of experience are perhaps more poignant, but they're also sadder. Mabel deeply treasures these individual moments and wants them to last, while Dipper wants to charge ahead toward the future. But ultimately, Dipper comes to an understanding that simply because moments in his life are not markers of maturity, they are not markers of this linear progression to being accepted into the adult world as a mature and studious and thoughtful and respectable person, that doesn't mean those moments don't have value. His attraction to Wendy is transient, it's a bit silly, it does not blossom into this great, passionate love, and yet it still has value. It still has significance. Wendy is understanding and thoughtful. Dipper certainly could have picked a worse girl to have a first crush on. He sees her as being very cool, and she is cool, perhaps cooler than he understands at first. She is cool enough to not make a big deal out of his very obvious attraction to her. She knows it. Of course she does. Dipper doesn't know that she knows it because he is a child stuck in his own little myopic worldview. He has only a fleeting understanding of himself, and he certainly does not understand how others see him. And yet, she's not bitter, she's not angry, nor does she laugh at him or patronize him. She appreciates this crush, even if it's not one that she can reciprocate, largely because he is still a child, while she, though young herself, is in a different stage of life. Wendy and Dipper's attraction to her is a quintessential part of his Bildung, as the Germans put it. You probably know that term best in the word Bildungsroman, or a coming-of-age book. Roman is just novel. Bildung is coming of age. It's a maturation process. It is the abandonment of the narrow and limited ideas of childhood and the opening up of one's mind into a greater and more robust understanding of the world. Now, of course, such a broadening is not only associated with adolescence. If you stop learning and you stop expanding your perspective as soon as you leave high school, you're going to be a rather shallow person. But this sense of a personal transformation, of leaving behind a fixed and rather insular and myopic conception of oneself and growing into a broader understanding of who one is and who one is in the world is most obviously seen in adolescence. Dipper has to comprehend that a lot of his preconceptions are what Sartre would call bad faith, in that they are attempts to construct this singular, pure, pristine identity and try to attach the self, which is innately always evolving and always transforming in its relations to the world, and act like, yes, this is me, this is myself, this one-dimensional, fixed, perfect, intelligible set of labels or set of characteristics is who I am. But that's not true. It can't be true. No static image can the self be reduced to, because the self is innately fluctuating. These preconceived ideas of who one is are inevitably being overrun and overwhelmed by relations to the world as it actually is, and how one finds oneself changed by the world, how one finds one's perceptions of the world changed just through the steady onrush of experience and the inevitable fluctuations that are innately a part of life. Dipper eventually grows to understand himself better, and a lot of that greater understanding is linked to Wendy. He understands that she was aware the whole time, and then that's okay. It's a bit embarrassing, sure, but he can have this crush, he can not have it be reciprocated, and while it's unfortunate, it does not devastate him. He can move on. There are other moments of greater understanding that occur via Wendy as well. My personal favorite is when he is time traveling back to the past and he sees a much younger Wendy who has a crush on him. And it's, of course, a bit weird and uncomfortable. And he understands that how he is feeling is quite similar to how she was feeling when he had such a passionate crush on her. That's not to say it's exactly the same. But the important thing is that this encounter with past little kid Wendy gives him a sense of perspective. It gives him a capacity to better understand himself. One of Dipper's greatest faults is his tendency toward a kind of anxious, overthinking, enervated isolation. He's trapped within his own mind, and he can only think of himself within the perspective of his own thoughts and his own experiences. This is normal for a kid of that age, and it is more, not less, common for kids of that age who are rather intelligent in a bookish way and spend a lot of time thinking and contemplating things. I can speak from experience. As such, this perspective is understandable, but it's limited. It tends toward not just a lack of understanding social cues, though that's part of it, but a lack of understanding how one is seen in the world. Lack of understanding how one is perceived. and the lack of understanding how to perceive the world from one's own perspective, how to not just be absorbed in one's own self, not self-absorption in a innately egotistical way, but just self-absorption in the fact that you spend a lot of time by yourself thinking about things that are interesting only to you, and you start having this greater understanding of what interests other people and the world around you. It's a process of maturation. And for Dipper, that's very much connected to Wendy. He takes those hits, he takes this sort of embarrassment, but that embarrassment is a reasonable price toward this greater knowledge. Not simple book knowledge or investigatory knowledge of the secrets of Gravity Falls, but true and honest life knowledge. He understands that he can be wrong, that his perceptions of himself and others can be wrong. His idealized view of Wendy, while understandable from that age, is a bit embarrassing. And he learns, even in his interactions with Pacifica, we see that he learns. That relationship doesn't develop as much as it could have throughout the rest of Gravity Falls, but it's clear that there is this connection between them. Possibly, perhaps, likely romantic, but more than that, it's about understanding. It's about him being willing to be humble, to understand that his first conceptions of her are wrong, that they are limited by his own narrow perspective, and that she's really a different person than he thought she was. And he has an easier time coming to that revelation because he has already grown a lot, because he has already seen to the extent that conceptions that he cared about so much, the desire to be cool in front of Wendy, the idea that Wendy didn't know about his attraction, the idea that he had a chance with her, or the idea that losing her would be completely devastating. All of these conceptions turned out to be narrow and limited. He grows to have a greater understanding of the limitations of these initial visceral, knee-jerk reactions. Instead, he's more willing to listen, to understand, to get to know the world and himself better. That benefits him in Pacifica, but more importantly, I think it just benefits Dipper as a person in the long run. This growth owes to a lot of things, but his relationship with Wendy is one of those things, and an important one. It's transient, but it's perfect. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.